Social links are a core part of Atlas titles, and while Metaphor ReFantazio struggles with relatability due to the fantasy setting, it makes up for that in spades by having the social links provide the necessary context and understanding required for the main plot to function. I suppose I'm being a bit unfair with the relatability remark. It's just that Persona has always appealed to my demographic by having characters who are extremely relatable to the struggles of modern youths, which is why Persona has become the Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest of my generation. Metaphors, while being a more fantastical setting, also covers more adult themes that many young people might not have experience with, such as the grief over a son, guilt over leaving your previous line of work, and trying to live up to the expectation of deceased parents. These themes are much more mature, and I can see how they'd be impactful to an older audience, but to me, I found it difficult to relate to my followers. But Metaphor is the first game Atlas has ever made that makes it absolutely essential for you to engage with the social link system, both from a gameplay and story perspective, and even if the individual storylines aren't as effective as I'm used to, their importance can't be understated. Firstly, Metaphor tells a much grander tale than we're used to. While each and every Persona eventually escalates/devolves into a teenagers killing God narrative, they usually remain much more personal and lower stakes stories for much of their enormous runtime. Meanwhile, Metaphor establishes in the prologue that the fate of the world is very much at stake, setting us up for a more wide-reaching and expansive narrative than we're used to. This expanded scope means that the main story has far less of a focus on our main party than usual. While almost every JRPG is guilty of letting party members fade into the background once their introduction arc is complete, said arcs are quite meaty and satisfying. Persona 4 and 5 almost exclusively focus on a single party member for most dungeons, with the overarching narrative happening in the background, and then the social links end up being a non-essential sequel to that arc. Metaphor puts its election plot thread front and center, with some party members only joining you for the final battle of their introductory dungeons before fading into the background. What's more, those arcs only lightly explore said character, with the exception of Haizme and Bacillo having a bulky character arc before joining the party. As such, the social links play a more critical role than the usual fleshing out of your party. This allows for the social links to feel more impactful, as the majority of a character's arc is hidden within them rather than being interwoven with the main narrative. While this runs the risk of having a less character-focused story, it allows the social links to feel much more important to a character's development. But aside from the main party members, there are also the social link exclusive characters. While these arcs are often more forgotten than your party members, they serve an integral role in Metaphor ReFantazio because of the essential world building they provide. Most world building in fantasy games is done in the background through documents and lore entries, which only appeal to a small niche of players. But with social links being interwoven into a core part of the game, it allows for the world building to become a main narrative, especially when it's combined with a character arc. See, Metaphor's extraordinary length is supported by the extraordinary depth and intricacy of its world. I mean, 8 main races would be excessive if it weren't for the social links putting an emphasis on each one. In a world filled with so much racial tension and discrimination, it would be dizzying to expect a player to learn about the relationships between each one of them of their own volition, but each social link carefully lays out how the world views each race and how they fit into the larger narrative. This makes the social links essential for fleshing out the world and understanding how this society works. It does wonders for the main narrative and having context for the election, as well as figuring out how to unite and win over each race. Where we already understood how the world worked in Persona, due to its modern setting, it's far more important to engage with the less critical parts of the world when we aren't familiar with how it operates. There are even arcs that concern things outside of race relations, like the Igniters and Underworld of this land. Where this would be normally nothing more than neat trivia that would only be found on a note hidden in a crate somewhere, it becomes a part of the world that's not only essential to learn, but accessible due to the presentation of being wrapped inside a confidant storyline. I would be much more inclined to read books in the Elder Scrolls if it had a shred of relatability to the plot. For example, a journal that chronicles the adventures of a main story character, a story with something that I can latch onto in the game world rather than just the context for the setting. What's more, Atlas finally made it essential to do every social link. I know that this is a minority of players, but I know some people who ignore social links if their arc doesn't pick up as the only gameplay consequence is not being able to fuse personas of a certain arcana, but they can circumvent this by capturing more personas in dungeons. With Metaphor's archetype system requiring investment in fusions of certain trees, as well as the limited pool of them, it forces the player to interact with each and every social link, which feels like the correct way to play the game to me. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, here's a video about the genius of the archetype system.